It's Monday, the 5th of July, 2021. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Sean Aylmer. The number of COVID cases around the world surges as New South Wales grapples to contain its current outbreak. That's our main story. Also coming up in today's podcast, Wall Street hits a new record as other financial markets get a bit tetchy about COVID-19. Westpac is forced to pay compensation over another systems failure. And is this the week that the Reserve Bank prepares the way for tighter monetary policy? Immediately after the podcast, stay listening for my chat to startup king Daniel Petre. But first, here's a brief look at markets. Wall Street finished higher over the weekend. The Dow Jones Industrial Average finished up 0.4%, and the S&P 500 and Nasdaq were both up 0.8%. The S&P 500 was up 1.7% for the week to a new high and has recorded 7 straight sessions of records, something last seen in 1997. European markets were up slightly with the Stoxx Europe 600 up 0.3% and London's FTSE flat. The S&P ASX 200 had a strong session on Friday, gaining 43 points or 0.6% to finish at 7,309 points. The market was pretty much flat for the week, with telco, resources and retail stocks gaining and utilities, IT and property stocks falling back. There's just a sense of pessimism in global share markets at the moment, with the possible exception of Wall Street. Fears of new waves of COVID-19, which I'll talk about in a moment, is causing some angst among investors. Last week, Eurozone shares fell 0.5%. In Japan, they were down 1% and 3% in China. Australia was flat. Bond yields and metal and iron ore prices fell, while the US dollar, which people want in tough times, appreciated against other currencies. Oil prices were up, which doesn't really follow my argument about concern among investors, but in the case of crude, the issue is around supply. OPEC and other major producers failed to reach an agreement on increasing the supply of oil over the weekend, pushing prices close to their highest level in 3 years. The group, which includes the 2 big producers, Saudi Arabia and Russia, are due to meet again tonight. Certainly the Aussie dollar is feeling the nervousness, trading around 75 US cents. So too gold, which has appreciated in the last couple of trading sessions and is creeping back towards the $1,800 US dollar an ounce mark. The downward trend in global COVID-19 cases has stalled and in some countries reversed as the Delta and Beta variants of the virus spread rapidly, particularly in non-vaccinated regions. In Australia, there are another 59 cases over the weekend, and the next few days in New South Wales are critical to determining whether the current lockdown continues beyond Friday. Globally, there's been a surge in cases in countries with low vaccination rates, including South Korea, Indonesia, South Africa, Russia, Colombia and Mexico. Even in places with high vaccination rates, notably the United Kingdom, around 20 states in the US, parts of Europe and Israel, case numbers are rising. It was Independence Day in the United States yesterday, and the number of travellers through airports topped 2 million for the second straight day. About 300,000 tourists were heading for Las Vegas, where COVID-19 positive rates are now at 4-month highs. California's rate of positive tests is at a 2.5-month high. The average number of new cases in the US is up 17% on a fortnight ago, despite fewer tests being taken. President Joe Biden had set a goal of 70% of Americans having received at least one vaccine jab by the 4th of July. The number was 67%. On Friday, Tokyo reported the highest number of daily infections since May, with the Olympic Games just 3 weeks away. Russia has reported 5 consecutive days of new record levels of COVID deaths. In the UK, around 25,000 new cases are being reported each day, and the trend is upwards. Media reports suggest quarantine rules are set to end and restrictions will be eased from 19 July in Britain, even though medical experts are calling for delays and changes. Almost 1/4 of people worldwide are vaccinated, and 50% of people in developed countries have had at least one dose of a vaccine. In Australia, that latter number is 25%. The Delta and Beta variants are hitting non-vaccinated people mostly. When vaccinated people contract the virus, the severity is much less. That's good news. But what the last couple of weeks has shown is that there's still a long way to go in the fight against COVID-19. The number of cases recorded globally is now 183 million, with almost 4 million deaths. And the best weapon we have against the coronavirus is vaccination. In a moment, the rest of the news you need to know this morning. In overseas news, cyber hackers hit more than 1,000 companies over the weekend, forcing one of Sweden's biggest supermarkets to close hundreds of stores. The hackers attacked an information technology management software supplier, throwing supply chains of thousands of companies into chaos. While it's unclear who was behind the attack, Russian criminal groups have been named. A ransom has been demanded. It comes just weeks after US President Joe Biden asked Russian President Vladimir Putin to crack down on cybercrime. The European Union is considering imposing a deadline to phase out internal combustion engines to encourage the take-up of electric vehicles. According to the Financial Times, the deadline would be 2035. Cars are the biggest emitters of CO2 globally. Chinese regulators have ordered app stores to remove ride-sharing group Didi, citing violation in collection and usage of personal information. Didi completed one of the largest IPOs ever last week on Wall Street, raising $67 billion, and the move just days after listing shows the perils of buying into Chinese stocks. The employment market in the US is gathering pace with 850,000 new jobs last month. Unlike Australia, the US labour market has taken time to kick back into gear. There are still 6.8 million fewer jobs than February 2020 when the pandemic began. And it's been a good weekend for the Brits. First, they made it into the Euro football semi-finals after beating Germany and Ukraine. They'll play on Thursday morning Australian time for a chance to take on either Italy or Spain in the final. And over the weekend, London reclaimed its crown as the largest shared trading centre in the region, having been dethroned by Amsterdam following Brexit. The FTSE started trading Swiss equities again, and that was enough to reclaim the crown. Locally, restrictions across the country are slowly being eased, though New South Wales will remain shut at least until the end of the week. On Friday, the Northern Territory and Western Australia came out of lockdown. Yesterday, the lockdown in Queensland was lifted. New South Wales State Premier Gladys Berejiklian is hoping some easing may occur from this Friday, but it's too soon to tell. There were 51 new cases in New South Wales over the weekend, including 3 aged care residents, all of whom were vaccinated. None are showing COVID symptoms. Otherwise, there were 7 cases in Queensland and 1 in Western Australia. The numbers follow Friday's National Cabinet meeting, which agreed to halve the international arrivals cap, even though there are still 34,000 Australians stranded overseas. And the Prime Minister said there would be a phased approach to emerging from the COVID crisis, with travel becoming available and lockdowns less regular as the number of fully vaccinated Australians increased. Australia will also trial 7-day at-home quarantine for fully vaccinated travellers with a focus on foreign students and workers. Under the federal government's plan, agreed to by the state premiers, Phase 1 is about suppressing the virus, and that's where we're at now. Phase 2 will include an easing of restrictions on vaccinated residents, with lockdowns only used in extreme circumstances. In Phase 3, which requires the majority of people to be vaccinated, COVID-19 would be managed somewhat like the flu, with vaccinated residents exempt from restrictions. And Phase 4 gets the world back to where it was in January last year, with a few additions for non-vaccinated travellers. Westpac revealed on Friday that it was exposed to a potential $200 million fraud. A company called Forum Finance was at the centre of a complex potential fraud involving leasing equipment. The bank said no customers had experienced a loss and it had informed regulators. Meanwhile, the bank said it will pay $87 million in compensation to customers of its BT Wrap platform who hadn't been notified of corporate activity that had occurred over 15 years. Customers owned shares via Westpac advisors, but weren't told of around 328,000 corporate actions, such as share buybacks, rights issues and takeovers, between 2005 and 2019. Clearly, there was a failing of systems. The bank self-reported back in the middle of 2019 has made provisions of $130 million earmarked for compensation. The partners in the Gorgon LNG project in Western Australia, Chevron, Shell and ExxonMobil, will invest another $6 billion to keep up supplies of offshore gas to the plant. The country's largest ever single resource investment project, worth $72 billion, supplies customers across Asia, including China and Japan. The numbers for these oil and gas projects are just so big. It's a huge week for the economy. The Reserve Bank Board meets tomorrow, with many analysts expecting the central bank to start preparing the way for tighter monetary policy. No one thinks there'll be any change to the official cash rate, but it could announce a more flexible approach to its purchase of bonds and continue focusing on yield curve control based on the April 2024 bond rather than shift it to the November bond program. Okay, so what's all that mean in English? At the moment, the Reserve Bank is doing everything it can to keep a lid on lending rates out to 3 years. By sticking with the April bond, the bank is signalling that it's less interested in keeping a cap on rates around the 3-year mark. So, fixed home loan rates on 3 years and beyond could start creeping higher. If you want to know more, and why wouldn't you, check your playlist for my interview with economist-in-residence Stephen Koukoulas. The head of the Victorian Royal Commission into Crown Resorts, Ray Finkelstein, has questioned the gaming giant's desire to overhaul its corporate structure and culture. At the end of last week, Commissioner Finkelstein suggested that change at Crown was because of the government inquiries being held and regulators' close attention. He asked whether the company was going to go back to its old ways when everyone stops looking. Seven Group, which is attempting to buy Boral, has called on the building materials company to suspend its share buyback program. Seven's made an $8.8 billion bid and on Friday argued that Boral should be in a blackout period, meaning no internal share trading, ahead of the August 24 results. Seven's share price jumped more than 2% on Friday. Boral's share price closed unchanged at $7.36. And investor lending for housing hit its strongest level in 6 years during May, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Total new housing loan commitments rose almost 5% to a new high of $33 billion. It shows that the booming property market is once again drawing in speculators. Growth in investor lending for housing was 13.3%, up from 2.1% a month earlier. But investor loans are 28% of the total value of housing loan commitments, much higher than most of last year, but still well below the 46% level back in 2015. Up next is our daily interview. And today's chat is a terrific insight into the world of startups and venture capital. A few weeks ago, I spoke to Daniel Petre AO about philanthropy in Australia. Well, he's back today, and this time we're talking about his venture capital firm, Airtree Ventures. He tells me what a founder needs to do before they approach someone like him for an investment, what he's looking for in an idea, and what sectors he tends to avoid. It's a must listen. Up next in the Fear and Greed playlist. And stick around after that for our other podcast, Fear and Greed, the week ahead. As I mentioned earlier, it's worth checking out. Economist Stephen Koukoulas and I go through all the big economic news coming up this week, and there's a lot of it. And I get his thoughts on what happened last week too. It's a great cheat sheet for the week, all covered in less than 10 minutes. It's Monday, the 5th of July, 2021. I'm Sean Aylmer, and that was Fear and Greed. Enjoy your day.